Some people aren't cut out for success. Those were my sister Vanessa's exact words the night I told my family I'd been let go from Meridian Consulting. She didn't whisper it or say it behind my back. She announced it across our parents' dining table, wine glass in hand, lips curved in what she probably thought was sympathetic concern. But I recognized that look. It was the same one she wore when she told me my college boyfriend was settling for me, or when she suggested my apartment was cozy in that tone that really meant small and disappointing. For years, I let her narratives about my life go unchallenged. I nodded when she explained my shortcomings to family friends, stayed silent when she rewrote my achievements as lucky breaks, and never corrected her when she positioned herself as the successful sister while painting me as the perpetually struggling one. But here's what Vanessa never saw coming. What would you do if the sister who spent a decade minimizing your worth suddenly found herself sitting across from you in a job interview for her dream position? A position where you controlled the outcome. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never planned on being the one to teach my sister about humility, but life has a way of creating perfect moments of clarity when you least expect them. Let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Lily Chen, 32 years old, middle child of 3, and according to family legend, the creative but impractical one. My older sister Vanessa was the achiever, business school, fast-track promotions, condo downtown before 30. My younger brother Michael was the charmer, everyone's favorite, skating through life on good looks and better connections. And then there was me, with my art degree that took 6 years to complete, my interesting career choices, and my apparent inability to commit to a single professional path. At least that was the story Vanessa had carefully crafted about me, over Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. The truth was significantly different, but I'd long ago stopped trying to correct her version of my life. It was easier to nod and change the subject than to challenge the narrative she'd invested so much in creating. It was an unusually warm April evening when everything began to shift. Cherry blossoms lined the streets of our neighborhood, their soft pink petals collecting in gutters and across windshields. I'd driven 40 minutes to my parents' suburban home for our monthly family dinner, a tradition my mother insisted on maintaining, even though we were all adults, with supposedly independent lives. The familiar scent of my mother's 5-spice chicken filled the house as I walked through the front door. Dad was in his usual spot, half watching a baseball game while pretending to help set the table. Michael hadn't arrived yet. He was chronically 20 minutes late to everything. Vanessa, however, was already there, arranging a store-bought fruit tart on one of Mom's ceramic platters as though she'd made it herself. "There she is," Mom called from the kitchen, "just in time to help with the rice." I kissed her cheek and took over the wooden spoon she was holding. This was our ritual. I always helped finish whatever dish needed attention, while Vanessa presented everything as though she'd coordinated the entire meal. "How's work?" Mom asked, lowering her voice slightly. She always asked about work, and I always gave her the same answer. "Fine," I said, stirring the pot. "Busy, lots of projects." What I didn't tell her was that earlier that week, I'd been called into the glass-walled conference room where Meridian's HR director and my department head sat waiting with identical expressions of corporate regret. Budget cuts, restructuring. Nothing personal. The usual platitudes that accompany the abrupt end of employment. "Lily, you're practically drowning in that sweater," Vanessa commented as she walked into the kitchen. "I keep telling you, dressing for success actually helps. Create success." She was wearing a tailored blazer over a silk blouse, hair pulled into a sleek bun that emphasized her sharp cheekbones. I looked down at my oversized cardigan and shrugged. "It's comfortable." "Comfort doesn't get promotions," she replied with the practiced ease of someone who believed her every opinion was valuable wisdom. Dinner proceeded as it always did. Dad asked about Michael's latest girlfriend. Mom pushed second helpings onto everyone's plates. Vanessa detailed her recent business trip to Chicago, where she'd apparently saved an important client presentation from disaster. I listened and nodded, offering the expected responses at the appropriate moments. Then came the dessert course. Vanessa's store-bought tart and Mom's homemade almond cookies, and with it, the inevitable shift to more personal inquiries. "So," Mom began, looking at me with hopeful eyes, "any news to share?" I knew what she was asking. In our family, news meant promotions, relationships, or property purchases, the tangible markers of adult success. I'd been planning to keep my job situation private, at least until I had a new position secured. But something about Vanessa's smug certainty as she sipped her after-dinner tea made me change my mind. "Actually, yes," I said, setting down my fork. "I'm going to be looking for a new position. Meridian had some budget cuts, and my department was affected." The silence that followed was brief but heavy. Dad looked uncomfortable, stirring sugar into his already sweetened tea. Mom reached for my hand across the table, her expression shifting to maternal concern. "Oh, honey," she started, but Vanessa's laugh cut through the moment like a knife. It wasn't a full laugh, just a sharp, quick exhale through her nose that somehow managed to communicate volumes of judgment. "Again?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "Wasn't it just last year you left that startup? What was it called? Tech Fusion?" "Tech Vision," I corrected quietly. "And I left because they relocated their entire creative team to Austin. This is different." "Of course it is," Vanessa nodded, but her tone suggested otherwise. She turned to our parents with the expression of someone about to deliver expert analysis. "The consulting industry can be brutal if you're not naturally competitive. Some people just aren't wired for high-pressure environments." "It was a company-wide restructuring," I clarified, keeping my voice even. 7 other people from my team were also let go. "Which really just means you weren't essential enough to keep," Vanessa replied casually, as though she were simply stating an obvious fact rather than deliberately undermining me. "No judgment. We all have different strengths. Your artistic talents are just better suited to more flexible environments." Dad cleared his throat, clearly searching for a way to diffuse the tension. "Well, the job market is supposed to be good right now. I'm sure you'll find something soon." "Absolutely," Mom added quickly. "With your experience, companies will be lining up." Vanessa took a deliberate sip of her tea. "Actually, I might be able to help. The manager at my gym is looking for someone to redesign their website. It's just freelance, but it could keep you afloat while you figure things out." She delivered this with a smile that anyone else might have mistaken for genuine helpfulness. "Some people aren't cut out for success in corporate environments," she continued, warming to her subject. "And that's perfectly fine. We can't all be climbing the ladder. Some need to be, what's that phrase? Finding their bliss in more creative pursuits." The phrase hung in the air, settling over the table like a fine dust. I could see my parents' expressions, the mixture of concern and acceptance that told me they were, once again, absorbing Vanessa's assessment of my life as truth. In their eyes, I was becoming exactly what my sister had been painting me as for years: unstable, professionally adrift, in need of guidance. I should have defended myself. I should have mentioned that despite the layoff, I'd received exemplary performance reviews for 3 consecutive quarters. I could have explained that my department head had personally apologized, explaining that the cuts were determined by corporate leadership based purely on last and first out policies, not performance. I might have noted that I'd already received interest from 2 competitors within days of updating my LinkedIn profile. Instead, I smiled and asked if anyone wanted more almond cookies. Later, as I helped Mom clear the dishes, Vanessa leaned against the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone with practiced nonchalance. "I've sent you a link to a job board specifically for people transitioning careers," she said without looking up. "Lots of entry-level positions that could be a good fresh start." Oh, and Rebecca from my tennis club is looking for someone to help with social media for her boutique. Might be perfect for you. Low pressure, creative freedom. I told her you'd be interested. Thanks, I replied, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. I continued loading the dishwasher, carefully arranging plates in neat rows the way my mother preferred. No problem. That's what sisters are for, Vanessa said, finally looking up from her phone. Not everyone is meant to succeed in the same way. Your path is just different. Different. The word itself wasn't insulting, but the way she said it with that slight downward inflection transformed it into something close to pity. In Vanessa's vocabulary, different was code for less than, and we both knew it. As I drove home that night, her words echoed in my mind. Some people aren't cut out for success. Some people aren't cut out for success. Some people aren't cut out for success. The phrase repeated like a cruel mantra, syncing with the rhythmic swish of my windshield wipers as rain began to fall. What Vanessa didn't know, what none of my family knew, was that 3 days before the layoff, I'd received a LinkedIn message from Alexandra Winters, the newly appointed CEO of Elysian Partners, one of the most prestigious firms in our industry. We'd worked together briefly years earlier, before she'd climbed to her current position, and she'd remembered a strategy I'd developed for a particularly difficult client. Your approach was brilliant, her message read. I've been following your work since then. We should talk. I'm building a new team and need someone with your perspective. I hadn't mentioned this to my family for a simple reason. Experience had taught me that sharing potential opportunities with Vanessa inevitably led to subtle sabotage. When I'd been considering graduate school, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She'd casually mentioned to our extended family that I was finally going back to school since the art degree didn't work out. When I received an industry award for an advertising campaign, she'd explained to our cousin's husband that it was one of those participation awards they give to smaller agencies to keep them engaged. So I'd kept Alexandra's message to myself, responded professionally, and scheduled a preliminary coffee meeting for the following week. I'd planned to share the news only after something concrete materialized. As I pulled into my apartment complex, my phone chimed with a text message. Vanessa, of course. Forgot to mention, my company is looking for a junior graphic designer. Starting salary is below market, but beggars can't be choosers. Let me know if you want me to put in a word. I placed my phone screen down on the passenger seat and sat in silence, listening to the rain drum against the roof of my car. 10 years of this. 10 years of having my accomplishments minimized, my setbacks magnified, and my potential capped by someone else's narrative. 10 years of swallowing responses and taking the high road. Something shifted inside me in that moment. Not anger exactly, but a quiet, clear-eyed recognition that the dynamic between us would never change unless I changed it. Not with arguments or explanations, those had never worked before, but with irrefutable evidence that her entire assessment of me had been wrong. I picked up my phone, typed a brief, "Thanks for thinking of me," in response, and then opened my email to find Alexandra's meeting invitation. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., an upscale coffee shop downtown. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the world with that peculiar freshness that follows a spring storm. I dressed with unusual care, not in the corporate uniform Vanessa would have chosen, but in a way that felt authentically me while still projecting confidence. A structured charcoal dress, vintage jade earrings that had been my grandmother's, and comfortable but elegant black boots. The coffee shop Alexandra had chosen was intentionally removed from the main business district, a place unlikely to be frequented by industry colleagues. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table that offered both privacy and a view of the entrance. Alexandra arrived precisely on time, her presence commanding attention without obvious effort. She was perhaps 10 years my senior, with silver-streaked dark hair cut in a precise bob and eyes that evaluated everything with rapid efficiency. "Lily," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Thank you for making time. I know transitions can be hectic." I blinked in surprise. "You heard about Meridian?" She nodded as she took the seat across from me. News travels fast. Their loss, potentially my gain. The conversation that followed was unlike any professional discussion I'd experienced before. Alexandra wasn't interested in my resume or formal qualifications. She'd already researched those. Instead, she wanted to know how I thought, how I approached problems, what I believed about our industry's future. "Meridian never fully utilized your strategic abilities," she said at one point, stirring her tea with precise movements. "They had you categorized as a creative resource when your real talent is in identifying patterns others miss." An hour passed, then nearly 2. Alexandra ordered a second round of drinks and finally arrived at what appeared to be the purpose of our meeting. "I'm restructuring Elysian's entire approach to client acquisition and retention," she explained. "The old model is outdated, too hierarchical, too slow to adapt. I need someone who can see both the creative and strategic dimensions simultaneously. Someone who questions established patterns." She placed a slim folder on the table between us. "This is what I'm proposing. Director of Strategic Development. You'd build your own team, implement your own systems, and report directly to me. The compensation package reflects the level of responsibility." I opened the folder, my eyes immediately finding the salary figure, nearly double what I'd been making at Meridian. The benefits, equity options, and performance bonuses were equally impressive. "Why me?" I asked, genuinely curious. There must be dozens of more experienced candidates. Alexandra's expression softened slightly. "Experience often means entrenchment in outdated thinking. You see possibilities where others see procedures. That's rare and valuable." She glanced at her watch. "Take the weekend to consider it. We can discuss details on Monday if you're interested." As she stood to leave, she added, "One condition, though. Complete confidentiality until the official announcement. We're making several significant changes simultaneously, and timing the public narrative is crucial." I nodded my agreement, and with a brief handshake, Alexandra departed, leaving me alone with a folder that represented everything Vanessa had deemed beyond my capabilities. That evening, my phone lit up with another text from my sister. "Mom's worried about you. Dinner at my place tomorrow night? I've invited a friend who runs a digital marketing agency. Entry-level positions, but good experience for someone needing a fresh start." I stared at the message for a long moment, composing, and deleting several responses before finally settling on a simple, "Thanks, but I have plans tomorrow." "Rain check?" Her reply came almost immediately. "You shouldn't isolate yourself during career transitions. It's not healthy. I'll tell my friend you're between opportunities." Something about that last message, the presumption, the casual way she positioned herself as my career manager, crystallized everything I'd been feeling. I placed the phone face down on my coffee table and turned instead to the folder Alexandra had given me, reviewing each page with careful attention. By Sunday evening, my decision was made. I emailed Alexandra my acceptance and received her response within minutes. "Excellent. My assistant will send onboarding details. Remember, confidentiality is essential for now. We announced the new structure in 6 weeks." For the next month and a half, I lived a double life of sorts. To my family and former colleagues, I was still job hunting, still between opportunities, as Vanessa put it. In reality, I was working closely with Alexandra to restructure Elysian's entire approach to client services, interviewing potential team members, and developing the systems that would define my new department. Each Sunday dinner became an exercise in restraint. Vanessa's helpful suggestions grew increasingly condescending as weeks passed, with no announcement of new employment from me. "You really should consider the administrative position at Michael's firm," she said during one particularly difficult meal. "You need to rebuild your professional reputation, and being choosy isn't a luxury you can afford right now." Mom would give me concerned glances. Dad would clear his throat and change the subject. Michael, to his credit, occasionally tried to deflect Vanessa's advice with comments about how the job market was complicated. But the family narrative remained consistent. Lily was struggling. Lily needed guidance. Lily wasn't quite capable of navigating professional waters without assistance. I absorbed it all silently, knowing what they didn't. That each day brought me closer to the reveal that would permanently alter their perception. The Wednesday before Elysian's public announcement, I received an unexpected text from Vanessa. "Great news. Got you an interview at Carlton Partners. Junior communication specialist. Not ideal, but decent salary and good foot in the door. Friday at 2 p.m. Sending details now." Before I could respond, a second message arrived with an address, contact name, and brief description of the position, which would represent a significant step backward in both responsibility and compensation from my role at Meridian, let alone my new position at Elysian. "Already confirmed you'll be there," a third text added. "Don't worry about thanking me. That's what sisters do. Wear something professional." I stared at my phone, momentarily speechless. Vanessa had not only arranged an interview without my consent, but had also confirmed my attendance without consulting me. The breathtaking presumptuousness of it was almost admirable in its completeness. I was about to decline when a notification email arrived from our HR team at Elysian. Finalized schedule for Friday's department interviews. As Director of Strategic Development, I would be conducting final interviews for several positions on my new team. I scrolled through the list of candidates, and there, scheduled for 2:30 p.m., was a name that made me catch my breath. Vanessa Chen, interviewing for Senior Client Relationship Manager. The coincidence was so perfect it almost seemed manufactured, but I knew it wasn't. Carlton Partners and Elysian were located in the same downtown office complex, just different towers. Vanessa had arranged my interview at Carlton without realizing that just 30 minutes later and a building away, she would be interviewing with me. I checked our application database and found her resume, submitted 3 weeks earlier. She hadn't mentioned applying to Elysian during any of our family dinners, perhaps assuming I wouldn't be interested in her professional movements, or more likely, not wanting to share the spotlight of potential good news. For a long moment, I considered my options. I could recuse myself from her interview, citing our relationship. I could reschedule her for a different day. I could even simply tell her the truth now, avoiding the inevitable shock of our Friday encounter. Instead, I texted back, "Thanks for thinking of me. I'll see what I can do about Friday." Not a confirmation, but not a rejection either. Just enough ambiguity to keep the situation intact. Friday arrived with the crisp efficiency that seemed to characterize my new professional life. I dressed with particular care, a tailored navy suit that communicated authority without ostentation, my grandmother's jade earrings for a touch of personal heritage, hair pulled back in a simple, elegant knot. I arrived at Elysian at 7:30, hours before Vanessa's scheduled interview, and immersed myself in preparation. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and department coordination. At 1 o'clock, I reviewed the afternoon's interview schedule with our HR partner, discussing the specific qualities we were seeking for each position. "Vanessa Chen has an impressive corporate background," she noted, glancing at the resume. "Currently at Westfield Global. Any red flags from her references?" "None that were reported," I replied neutrally. "We'll see how the in-person assessment aligns with her qualifications." At 2:15, I took my place in the interview room, a modernist space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, glass and steel and carefully controlled impressions. Another interviewer would join me, but as department head, I would lead the conversation. At precisely 2:30, there was a confident knock on the door. Our receptionist opened it, gestured inside, and then stepped back to reveal my sister, perfectly poised in her interview best. A black suit, almost identical to ones she'd previously, suggested I should invest in to be taken more seriously. "Ms. Chen, welcome to Elysian Partners," the receptionist said professionally. "Your interview will be with our Director of Strategic Development." Vanessa stepped into the room, portfolio clutched professionally in her manicured hands, practiced interview smile already in place. It took approximately 3 seconds for her eyes to find mine behind the desk, and another 2 for comprehension to dawn. The transformation of her expression was subtle but unmistakable, professional poise giving way to momentary confusion, followed by disbelief, followed by the rapid recalibration of someone whose entire understanding of a situation has been instantly and irrevocably altered. "Lily?" Her voice held a question mark where confidence had been just moments before. I stood, extending my hand professionally across the desk we now shared. "Vanessa, please, come in and have a seat. We're looking forward to learning more about your qualifications for the Senior Client Relationship Manager position." Her hand met mine in an automatic gesture, her grip uncharacteristically loose. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives, Vanessa Chen was completely speechless. The interview room seemed to shrink around us as Vanessa slowly lowered herself into the chair opposite me. Her portfolio, which she'd been clutching like a shield, now rested limply on her lap. The second interviewer, Elysian's HR director Marcus, glanced between us with professional curiosity, but no recognition of our connection. I hadn't mentioned our relationship to anyone at the company, preferring to establish myself on my own merits before introducing personal complications. "Shall we begin?" I asked, my voice steady and professional as I opened the folder containing her resume. The paper felt cool and crisp beneath my fingertips, a tangible reminder that this was real, not some elaborate fantasy of vindication I'd conjured during one of Vanessa's lectures about my career failings. Vanessa straightened almost imperceptibly, years of corporate training kicking in despite her obvious shock. "Of course," she replied, her voice slightly higher than usual. Her eyes darted to Marcus, perhaps hoping to find an ally or at least a neutral party, but he was already reviewing his interview notes. "Your resume indicates you've been with Westfield Global for nearly 6 years," I began, following our standard interview protocol. "Can you walk us through your progression there and what motivated your interest in Elysian Partners?" For the next 45 minutes, I conducted the interview exactly as I had the dozen others I'd led that week. Professional, thorough, occasionally challenging, but never personal. I asked about her experience managing difficult clients, requested specific examples of her problem-solving approach, and inquired about her 5-year professional goals. Standard questions that would have felt entirely unremarkable in any other context. Vanessa answered each question with growing composure, her initial shock giving way to the polished professional persona she'd perfected over years in corporate environments. If Marcus noticed anything unusual in our interaction, he gave no indication, occasionally interjecting with his own questions about team dynamics and conflict resolution strategies. As the interview neared its conclusion, I asked the final question on our assessment form. "What would you say is the most significant misconception people tend to have about you professionally?" Vanessa's eyes, which had been carefully focused, on a neutral spot just above my shoulder, finally met mine directly. Something flickered in her expression, a brief, unguarded moment of genuine vulnerability. "People often assume I've had an easy path," she said carefully. "That confidence means absence of struggle. They see the results, but not the work, the rejections, the moments of doubt." She paused, her fingers lightly touching the edge of her portfolio. "I think people sometimes mistake ambition for entitlement, without recognizing that behind most success stories are countless hours of invisible effort." The irony of her answer hung in the air between us, unacknowledged, but impossible to ignore. For years, she had been dismissing my struggles while positioning her successes as inevitable outcomes of superior ability rather than persistent effort. Now, she was claiming the very understanding she had never extended to me. "Thank you for your time today, Ms. Chen," I said, closing the interview folder. "We're conducting final interviews this week and expect to make our decision by next Friday. Our HR department will be in touch regardless of outcome." Marcus stood, extending his hand across the table. "It was a pleasure meeting you. Do you have any final questions for us before we conclude?" Vanessa shook his hand automatically, but her eyes remained on me. "Actually, yes," she said, her voice carefully modulated. "I'd be interested to know more about the leadership philosophy of the Strategic Development Department. It seems relatively new." The question was directed at Marcus, but we all knew it was meant for me. "Our department was established as part of Elysian's recent restructuring," I replied evenly. "We prioritize innovative problem-solving over hierarchical decision-making. Experience is valued, but not at the expense of fresh perspective." I paused, allowing myself one small moment of personal satisfaction. "We believe that true professional worth isn't determined by title or tenure, but by the ability to see possibilities where others see only procedure." Recognition flashed across Vanessa's face. I had quoted Alexandra's assessment of me almost verbatim. It was petty, perhaps, but after years of having my professional capabilities undermined at every family gathering, I allowed myself this single moment of indirect confirmation that others saw value where she had seen only limitation. "I see," she said quietly. "Thank you for clarifying." Marcus escorted her to the door with a few polite parting comments. As she reached the threshold, Vanessa turned back, her expression now carefully composed. "It was a pleasure meeting you." "Both?" she said, her gaze lingering on me for a moment too long to be casual. "I look forward to hearing from Elysian soon." The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. Marcus returned to his seat, already reviewing his notes. "Strong corporate background," he observed, though I'm not entirely convinced she'd adapt well to our more collaborative structure. She seems very individualistic in her approach to success. I nodded, making a non-committal sound as I gathered my papers. "We'll discuss all the candidates at tomorrow's review meeting," I said. "I should prepare for my 4 o'clock." Alone in my office, I allowed myself to process what had just happened. 6 weeks of maintaining professional composure while quietly establishing my new role had culminated in 15 seconds of perfect recognition, the moment Vanessa realized that every dismissive comment, every condescending suggestion, every narrative she'd constructed about my professional failings had been based on a fundamental misreading of both my capabilities and my position. My phone vibrated against my desk. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Vanessa, unsurprisingly. I let the messages accumulate without checking them, focusing instead on preparation for my final interview of the day. Whatever reckoning awaited between us, it would need to happen outside these glass walls. Here, I was not Vanessa's underachieving younger sister. I was the director of strategic development, and I had responsibilities that took precedence over family drama. 6:30, most of the office had emptied. I finished reviewing candidate assessments, made preliminary notes for the following day's meetings, and finally allowed myself to check my phone. 5 text messages and 2 missed calls, all from Vanessa. The texts progressed from initial shock, "We need to talk, ASAP," to incredulity, "How long have you been at Elysian? Why didn't you tell anyone?" to something approaching accusation. "Did you know I was interviewing today? Is this some kind of setup?" I slipped the phone into my bag without responding and made my way to the parking garage. The drive home felt surreal, as though I were traveling between 2 distinct realities that had suddenly, unexpectedly collided. For 6 weeks, I had maintained a perfect separation between my family life, where I was still perceived as professionally adrift, and my new role at Elysian, where I was respected, valued, and empowered. Now that barrier had dissolved, and I wasn't entirely prepared for the aftermath. My apartment building came into view. A modest mid-rise with a small courtyard garden that had been the primary selling point when I'd signed the lease 3 years earlier. As I pulled into my designated parking space, I spotted a familiar silver sedan already parked in the visitors section. Vanessa was leaning against the driver's side door, arms crossed, waiting. For a moment, I considered driving past, claiming exhaustion, postponing the inevitable confrontation. But that approach, avoidance rather than direct engagement, had been my pattern for too long. It had allowed Vanessa's narratives about me to go unchallenged for years. Perhaps it was time for a different strategy. I parked, gathered my things, and walked toward the building entrance with measured steps. Vanessa pushed away from her car when she spotted me, her expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. "How long?" she asked without preamble as I approached. "Let's not do this in the parking lot," I replied, continuing toward the entrance. After a moment's hesitation, she followed. The elevator ride to my 4th-floor apartment was silent and tense, the soft instrumental music playing through hidden speakers creating an almost comical counterpoint to the unspoken tension between us. I unlocked my door, set my bag on the entryway table, and moved into the kitchen. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, filling the electric kettle with water from the tap. "I don't want tea, Lily," Vanessa said, still standing by the door. "I want an explanation. How long have you been working at Elysian, and why didn't you tell anyone? Do Mom and Dad know?" I placed 2 mugs on the counter despite her refusal. 6 weeks, I answered calmly. And no one in the family knows yet. I've been under a confidentiality agreement until the official announcement next week. 6 weeks, she repeated, finally moving into the living room and perching on the edge of my sofa. "So when I've been sending you job listings and arranging interviews, you've actually been, what? A director? At Elysian Partners?" Her voice carried a note of disbelief that might have been comical in other circumstances. "Director of Strategic Development," I confirmed, watching the kettle begin to steam. "Reporting directly to Alexandra Winters." "Alexandra Winters, the CEO?" Vanessa's eyebrows rose toward her hairline. "How did you even get on her radar?" "We worked together years ago, before she was CEO. She remembered a strategy I developed for a challenging client situation." The kettle clicked off, and I poured hot water over jasmine tea leaves, allowing their gentle fragrance to fill the kitchen. "She reached out 3 days before Meridian's layoffs, actually. The timing was coincidental but convenient." Vanessa was silent for a long moment, processing this information. I carried the mugs to the living room, setting one on the coffee table in front of her despite her earlier refusal. Old habits, the peacekeeper, the accommodator, died hard. "So, today's interview," she finally said, not touching the tea. "Did you know I was scheduled? Was this some kind of, revenge scenario?" "No," I replied honestly. "I saw your name on the schedule yesterday. You applied 3 weeks ago and your resume came through our normal recruitment channels. I had no idea you were interested in Elysian until then." "And you didn't think to mention it? To recuse yourself from the interview?" "I considered it," I acknowledged, taking a sip of my tea. "But that would have required explaining our relationship to HR, which would have led to questions about why I hadn't disclosed it earlier, which would have meant revealing that I hadn't told my family about my position." I set the mug down carefully. It seemed simpler to proceed normally. "The decision about your candidacy won't be mine alone anyway. It will be made by the whole hiring committee." Vanessa ran a hand through her hair, disturbing its perfect arrangement for the first time that day. "This is surreal," she murmured. All these weeks, at every family dinner, while I've been giving you career advice and sending you job listings, you've been a director at one of the most prestigious firms in the industry, reporting directly to the CEO? The incredulity in her voice made something twist inside me. Not satisfaction, exactly, but a complex emotion that fell somewhere between vindication and lingering hurt. For years, Vanessa's perception of my professional capabilities had shaped our family's understanding of me. That perception had never aligned with reality. But until this moment, the gap had remained theoretical, abstract. Now it was starkly, undeniably concrete. "Why did you keep it secret?" she asked, finally reaching for the tea I'd placed before her. "I don't understand. Most people would be shouting this kind of opportunity from the rooftops." I considered my answer carefully, wanting to be honest without being needlessly cruel. "Would you have believed me if I'd told you?" I asked quietly. "Really believed me, without qualification or explanation?" Vanessa opened her mouth as if to offer an immediate affirmative, then closed it again, the reflexive response dying before it could fully form. She stared into her tea for a long moment. "I'd like to think so," she finally said. But her tone lacked conviction. "For years," I continued, "every professional setback I've experienced has been treated as confirmation of some inherent limitation. Every success has been positioned as an exception or a fortunate coincidence." I met her eyes directly. "When the startup relocated to Austin and I chose not to go, you told Aunt Helen I couldn't handle the pressure of a real tech environment. When I left the agency to join Meridian, you explained to Dad that I was finally settling for something stable rather than chasing creative fantasies." Vanessa's expression shifted subtly, not quite defensive, but not entirely receptive either. "I was trying to help you manage expectations," she said. "You've always been so." She paused, searching for the right word. "Idealistic." "What you call idealism," I replied, "Alexandra Winters calls innovative thinking. What you've interpreted as instability, she sees as adaptability." I set my mug down with a soft clink against the wooden coffee table. Different lenses, different conclusions. Silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of years of misaligned perceptions. Finally, Vanessa spoke again, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "So all those Sunday dinners, all those conversations about job hunting and career transitions, those were, what? An act?" "Not an act," I corrected. "A boundary. A choice to keep certain aspects of my life private until they were firmly established." I paused, considering my next words carefully. When you share good news with someone who has consistently underestimated you, their response often becomes about recalibrating their perception rather than genuinely celebrating your achievement. I wanted to skip that part. Something flickered across Vanessa's face, a flash of recognition, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. "And now?" she asked after another moment of silence. "When are you planning to tell Mom and Dad?" "The official announcement goes out next week," I replied. "I'll tell them after that." Vanessa nodded slowly, then set her barely touched tea back on the coffee table and stood. She smoothed her skirt in a habitual gesture, composure gradually returning to her features. "Well," she said with forced lightness, "this certainly changes the tone of Sunday dinner conversations going forward." I remained seated, looking up at my sister as she gathered her purse from where she'd set it on the entry table. "Vanessa," I said, stopping her before she reached for the door handle. "About your interview today." She turned, expression guarded. "Yes?" "You were well prepared," I said honestly. "Your responses were thoughtful and your experience is relevant. The decision will ultimately come down to fit with our specific team needs and management approach." A hint of her usual confidence returned to her posture. "And what are my chances in your professional assessment?" I considered the question. The truth was that Vanessa's qualifications were strong, but her approach to client relationships emphasized hierarchy and authority in ways that conflicted with Elysian's more collaborative model. Still, there were other departments within the company where her style might be better suited. "The specific position you interviewed for might not be the ideal match," I said carefully, "but I'd encourage you to keep Elysian in mind for future opportunities that align more closely with your strengths." She nodded once, accepting this assessment with more grace than I might have expected. "And when the broader family finds out about your position," she said, hand resting on the doorknob, "how would you prefer I respond?" The question surprised me. It contained an implicit acknowledgement that she had helped shape our family's perception of me and could influence their reaction to this news. It was the closest thing to an admission of her role in undermining me that I'd ever heard from her. "I'd prefer if you were genuinely happy for me," I answered simply. "No qualifications, no explanations, no narrative shaping. Just straightforward. Recognition that this is a significant achievement that I've earned on my own merits." Something shifted in her expression, a subtle softening around the eyes, a slight release of tension in her jaw. "I can do that," she said quietly, and for the first time that day, I believed her without reservation. After she left, I moved to the window that overlooked the courtyard garden, watching as Vanessa walked to her car with measured steps. She paused before opening the driver's door, looking up toward my window, though she couldn't see me through the reflection on the glass. For a moment, she seemed poised to return to the building, to continue our conversation, to perhaps offer something more substantial than the tentative olive branch she'd extended. Then she straightened her shoulders, slid into her car, and drove away. I remained at the window long after her taillights had disappeared from view, considering the strange symmetry of our encounter. For years, Vanessa had been the one with knowledge she believed I lacked, the secrets to professional success, the understanding of corporate hierarchies, the ability to navigate career advancement. Today, for the first time, our positions had been reversed. I had possessed knowledge she didn't have, insight she couldn't access, authority she hadn't anticipated. The difference was that I had no desire to use that reversal as she had, as a means of establishing superiority or reinforcing a particular narrative. What I wanted was simpler and more fundamental: acknowledgement of my capabilities on their own terms, recognition untainted by preconception or familial expectation. As I moved away from the window, my phone chimed with a new message. "Vanessa again. You're good at what you do. I saw that today. I should have seen it sooner." 10 words. 10 simple words that contained more genuine recognition than a decade of backhanded compliments and qualified praise. I read them twice, feeling something tight and long-held begin to unravel inside me. Not forgiveness exactly. That would require more than a text message, more than a single moment of clarity. But perhaps the beginning of a shift. The first, tentative movement toward a more balanced relationship. I didn't respond immediately. Some transformations needed space to breathe, time to establish themselves as more than momentary reactions. Instead, I returned to my kitchen, rinsed our mugs, and began preparing a simple dinner. Tomorrow would bring another day of building. My department, of establishing processes and refining strategies, of doing the work that had earned me recognition from people who had no preconceived notions about my capabilities. Sunday dinner loomed just 4 days away, the first one since. Vanessa had discovered my position at Elysian. I wasn't naive enough to believe that a single moment of recognition would fundamentally transform years of established patterns. But something had shifted today. Some small but significant recalibration of our dynamic that might, with care and continued honesty, evolve into something healthier. As I prepared my meal, I found myself thinking not about Vanessa's reaction or the upcoming family revelation, but about the young woman who would be joining my team next week, a recent graduate, with innovative ideas and uncertain confidence. I thought about how I would guide her, challenge her, ensure that her voice was heard in meetings where more experienced colleagues might dominate. I thought about creating a space where achievement was recognized without qualifiers and setbacks, were treated as opportunities for growth rather than confirmations of limitation. Perhaps that was the most meaningful outcome of today's encounter. Not the momentary satisfaction of seeing shock on my sister's face, but the deeper understanding of how powerfully perception shapes opportunity. I had been fortunate to find a mentor in Alexandra who saw possibilities in me that others had dismissed. Now I had the chance to extend that same clear-eyed evaluation to others, to become the kind of leader who recognizes potential untainted by assumption or expectation. My phone chimed again as I was plating my dinner. This time it was Alexandra. Team assessment meeting moved to 9 a.m. tomorrow. Bring your final recommendations for new hires. I responded with a simple confirmation, then sat at my small dining table, the events of the day settling around me like dust after a storm. Vanessa's candidacy would be discussed alongside others, evaluated on its merits rather than our relationship. I would be objective, professional, focused on what was best for Elysian rather than what was easiest for family dynamics. That approach, separating personal history from professional assessment, had been exactly what Alexandra had extended to me when she'd evaluated my capabilities rather than my resume. It was what I had been asking of Vanessa for years without success. And now, in a strange twist of circumstance, it was what I would extend to her. The opportunity to be judged by her actual abilities rather than someone else's narrative about them. There was a certain symmetry to it, a sense of a circle completing itself in unexpected ways. Not revenge or vindication, but something more nuanced. The chance to model the very behavior I had longed for, to embody the recognition I had sought. As I finished my solitary meal, I finally responded to Vanessa's text. Thank you. That means more than you might realize. The following morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, reviewing candidate files one final time before our assessment meeting. Vanessa's portfolio was among them, her qualifications laid out in clean professional formatting. 6 years at Westfield Global, consistent promotions, measurable client retention statistics, a master's degree from a respected business school. On paper, she appeared exactly as she had always presented herself, accomplished, strategic, upwardly mobile. What the resume couldn't capture were the qualities I had witnessed yesterday, the initial shock giving way to composed professionalism, the careful recalibration of approach when faced with unexpected circumstances, the vulnerability beneath, the polished exterior. Those human elements, visible only in direct interaction, were as relevant to her potential fit at Elysian as any bulleted accomplishment. The assessment meeting began precisely at 9, with 8 of us gathered around the conference table to discuss final candidates. Each department representative presented their top choices with supporting rationale. When it came time to discuss the senior client relationship manager position, I presented the 3 strongest candidates with neutral professional assessment. Candidate Chen demonstrates strong corporate experience and effective client retention strategies, I noted, using the same objective tone I'd employed for all evaluations. Her approach is somewhat hierarchical, which may present adaptation challenges to our collaborative model, but her technical qualifications are solid. The discussion proceeded methodically, with each candidate's strengths and limitations weighed against departmental needs. In the end, the committee favored another candidate, a woman with less corporate experience, but a more innovative approach to client relationships that better aligned with Elysian's evolving philosophy. I endorsed the decision without hesitation or qualification. It was the right choice for the team, for the company, for the direction Alexandra had established. Personal connections, family dynamics, the strange reversal of fortune that had placed me in position to evaluate my sister. None of these factors influenced the professional assessment. That evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, Alexandra stopped by my door. I heard the hiring committee made their final selections today, she said, leaning against the doorframe with casual authority. Satisfied with the outcomes? Yes, I replied, organizing the files on my desk into neat stacks. I think we've assembled a strong team across departments. Alexandra nodded, studying me with the perceptive gaze that had first identified potential others had overlooked. Marcus mentioned one of your candidates shared your last name, she observed casually. Relative? I looked up, meeting her eyes directly. My sister, I confirmed, seeing no reason to evade the question now that decisions had been finalized. I wasn't aware she'd applied until I saw the interview schedule yesterday. Alexandra raised an eyebrow, the only indication of surprise she allowed herself. And you didn't recuse yourself from the process? I considered it, I admitted. But the decision wouldn't be mine alone, and I was confident I could assess her candidacy objectively alongside the others, which I did. Alexandra was silent for a moment, her expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. And she wasn't selected for the position, she finally said, making it half statement, half question. No, Jenna Ashford was the committee's choice. She's less traditionally credentialed, but more aligned with our collaborative approach. Alexandra nodded once, decisively. Family dynamics in professional settings can be complicated, she observed. I trust you'll handle any personal fallout with the same discretion you've shown in other matters. Of course, I assured her. My sister and I have already discussed the situation. She understands that decisions are made based on departmental needs, not personal connections. That wasn't entirely accurate. Vanessa and I hadn't specifically discussed the outcome of her candidacy, but it represented my intention for our next conversation. The boundaries between personal history and professional assessment would remain clear and firm. Alexandra seemed satisfied with this response. Good, she said simply. The formal announcement of the new organizational structure goes out Monday morning. Are you prepared for the increased visibility that will bring? The question carried multiple layers of meaning: professional readiness for expanded responsibilities, personal readiness for public recognition, emotional readiness for the shifting perceptions that would inevitably follow. 6 weeks of building in relative anonymity were about to give way to organizational prominence and the scrutiny that accompanied it. Yes, I replied with quiet confidence. I'm ready. Alexandra's smile was brief but genuine. I never doubted it, she said, pushing away from the doorframe with characteristic efficiency. Have a good weekend, Lily. I'll see you Monday for the leadership team breakfast before the announcement. Sunday arrived with the gentle persistence of tradition, sunshine filtering through my apartment windows as I contemplated the family, dinner that loomed just hours away. This would be the first time facing Vanessa since our encounter at Elysian, the first opportunity to gauge whether our conversation had genuinely shifted something between us or merely provided a temporary recalibration. I dressed with particular care, not in the corporate attire I'd worn to assert my professional identity during our confrontation, but in something that felt more authentically me. A simple navy dress with clean lines, paired with the vintage jade earrings that had become something of a personal talisman. Not trying to impress, not attempting to blend in, just presenting myself without apology or qualification. The drive to my parents' home felt both familiar and strange, muscle memory guiding me through turns and intersections, while my mind rehearsed potential conversations. I had decided against making any formal announcement about my position at Elysian during tonight's dinner. The official press release wouldn't go out until tomorrow morning, and something in me wanted one last evening of observation before everything changed. One final opportunity to exist within the family dynamic as it had been before external. Validation reshaped their perception of me. My father opened the door when I arrived, greeting me with his characteristic half-hug, affectionate but restrained, the emotional equivalent of a firm handshake. Right on time, he said approvingly, as though punctuality were a virtue I'd only recently acquired. "Your mother's just finishing up the dumplings." The house smelled of ginger and scallions, the familiar scent of Sunday preparation that had remained consistent throughout my childhood and into adulthood. My mother appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a worn cotton towel. "Lily, come taste the filling. Tell me if it needs more salt." This too was ritual. Her pretense of seeking my culinary opinion when we both knew she had been perfecting these recipes since before I was born. I obliged, accepting the small spoonful she offered and making an appreciative noise. "Perfect as always, Mom." "Michael called," she said, turning back to her work. "He'll be late. Again." The slight emphasis on the final word contained no genuine reproach. My younger brother's chronic tardiness had long since been accepted as an immutable personality trait, like his charm or his inability to maintain a savings account. "Vanessa's setting the table," my father added, gesturing toward the dining room with his chin. "Maybe you could help her?" It wasn't really a question, and we both knew it. I nodded and moved toward the adjoining room, where my sister was meticulously arranging chopsticks and small porcelain spoons with the precision of someone performing delicate surgery. She looked up as I entered, her expression carefully neutral. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi," I echoed, moving to the opposite side of the table to continue the place-setting arrangement. "Need any help with anything specific?" "Just finishing up," she replied, adjusting a napkin to perfect alignment with the table edge. For several moments we worked in silence, the quiet punctuated only by the gentle click of porcelain against wood. It struck me that this might be the first time in years we had occupied the same space without one of us, usually Vanessa, feeling compelled to fill it with commentary or advice. Finally, she spoke again, her voice lowered to avoid carrying. "Into the kitchen." "I received an email from Elysian yesterday afternoon about the position." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the table arrangement. "I was going to call you about that, but I thought you might prefer processing it privately first." "They were very professional," she said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from the tablecloth. "The feedback was actually quite helpful, specific, thoughtful." She paused, then added with the hint of a rueful smile, "Not what I'm used to from rejection letters." "Jenna Ashford was selected," I confirmed quietly. "Her approach to client relationships aligns better with the direction Alexandra is taking the company. Your qualifications were strong, though." There was significant debate. Vanessa absorbed this information with a small nod. "It's strange," she said after another moment, "being on this side of the process. Usually, I'm the one evaluating candidates, making the selections." Her fingers traced the pattern on a porcelain spoon. "It's humbling. Useful, probably." Before I could respond, the front door burst open with a gust of energy that could only herald Michael's arrival. "Sorry I'm late," his voice called from the entryway. "Traffic was insane, and then I had to stop for—" He appeared in the dining room doorway, a bottle of wine in each hand, and stopped mid-sentence. "Whoa, you two are in the same room and no one's talking. Should I be worried?" Vanessa rolled her eyes in familiar exasperation. "We're setting the table, Michael. It doesn't require constant commentary." "Since when?" he quipped, placing the wine bottles on the sideboard. "Last time you two were alone together, Vanessa was explaining why Lily's apartment in Midtown was a transitional choice rather than a strategic investment." He mimicked our sister's precise diction with brotherly accuracy. I suppressed a smile as Vanessa's cheeks colored slightly. "I don't sound like that," she protested. "You absolutely do," Michael and I replied in unison, then exchanged a surprised glance at our synchronicity. For a moment, the three of us stood frozen in this unexpected moment of sibling alignment. Then Vanessa's lips twitched, and a reluctant laugh escaped her. "Fine, maybe I can be a bit prescriptive sometimes." "Sometimes?" Michael repeated incredulously, turning to me for confirmation. "Is she having a stroke?" Should we call someone? The tension that had lingered between Vanessa and me dissolved in the face of Michael's characteristic irreverence. My mother appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Everything ready? The dumplings are done." She glanced between us with the sharply attuned perception that had always made childhood secrets impossible to maintain. "What's going on?" "Nothing," all three of us answered simultaneously, which only deepened her suspicion. She murmured, clearly unconvinced but unwilling to delay dinner for an interrogation. Sit. Food's getting cold." We took our usual places. Dad at the head of the table, Mom at the foot, Michael and Vanessa on one side, me on the other. Another ritual, unchanged since childhood despite the supposed randomness of adult seating arrangements. Dad poured wine while Mom arranged serving dishes in the center of the table with practiced efficiency. "Michael, how's the new project coming along?" Dad asked as he passed the dumplings. This, too, was part of the established pattern. Beginning. Dinner conversation with Michael, the family member least likely to introduce tension or complication. Michael launched into an animated description of his latest architectural commission, gesturing expansively and nearly knocking over his wine glass in the process. Mom made appropriate noises of interest while Vanessa occasionally interjected with surprisingly insightful questions about zoning regulations and material sourcing. I listened, contributing the occasional comment, but mostly observing the familiar choreography of our family interaction. There was comfort in its predictability, even with the undercurrent of change I knew was coming. Tomorrow's announcement would reshape these dynamics in ways I couldn't fully anticipate, but for tonight, the established patterns held. "And Vanessa," Mom said, turning to her eldest once Michael's narrative had reached a natural conclusion. "How are things at Westfield? Still expecting that promotion next quarter?" Vanessa took a measured sip of wine before responding. "Actually," she said, setting her glass down carefully, "I've been exploring some other opportunities recently." Mom's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Really? But I thought you were on track for the executive committee." "I am," Vanessa confirmed. "But I've been with Westfield for 6 years now. It's good to keep aware of what else is happening in the industry, maintain perspective." She paused, then added with uncharacteristic self-reflection. "And sometimes what seems like the obvious next step isn't necessarily the best one for long-term growth." Dad nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. Never hurts to know your market. Value." I studied Vanessa across the table, noting the subtle differences in how she presented herself tonight. Less declarative, more contemplative. Whether this shift stemmed from our recent encounter or from her experience being on the receiving end of evaluation, it represented a noticeable evolution. "What about you, Lily?" Mom asked, turning to me with the familiar concerned expression. That had become her default when addressing my professional life. "Any promising leads? Your father's colleague at Pacific Insurance mentioned they might be looking for someone with marketing experience." I felt Vanessa's eyes on me, curious to see how I would navigate this question on the eve of tomorrow's announcement. "I'm actually in a good place professionally right now," I said carefully. "But thank you for thinking of me." Mom exchanged a quick glance with Dad. "That's good," she said cautiously. "Does that mean you found something new already?" I could have seized the moment, shared the news, accepted the inevitable surprise and congratulations that would follow. But something held me back, not fear or uncertainty, but a peculiar desire to maintain the liminal space between what had been and what would be for just a little longer. "I have some interesting developments in progress," I replied neutrally. "I'll have more to share soon." Michael narrowed his eyes, his intuition sharper than our parents often gave him credit for. "That was diplomatically vague," he observed. "Since when are you mysterious about job stuff?" Before I could respond, Vanessa surprisingly intervened. "Maybe Lily would prefer to wait until things are official before discussing them," she suggested. Not everyone feels the need to narrate every professional possibility in real time. The table fell momentarily silent, all of us registering. The unexpected defense from the quarter that had historically been most critical of my career choices. Mom recovered first, changing the subject to her garden club's upcoming exhibition with the practiced redirection of a woman who had navigated family dynamics for decades. As dinner progressed, I noticed Vanessa watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Not the evaluative assessment I was accustomed to, but something more nuanced, more questioning. When she caught me noticing, she didn't look away as she might have in the past, but offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, as though acknowledging something understood between us alone. After dessert, almond cookies and tea, another family. Constant. I helped Mom clear the dishes while Dad and Michael became absorbed in a basketball game on the living room television. Vanessa lingered in the dining room, ostensibly organizing leftover containers, but actually positioning herself within earshot of the kitchen. "You've been quiet tonight," Mom observed as she rinsed plates and handed them to me for loading into the dishwasher. "Everything all right?" "Yes," I assured her. "Just a lot on my mind lately." She nodded, accepting this without pressing further. "Your father and I worry sometimes," she said after a moment. "Not because we don't have faith in you," she added hastily, "but because you keep so much to yourself. It's hard to know how to help when you don't share what's happening." The comment struck me with unexpected force. In my effort to avoid Vanessa's constant evaluation, I had perhaps also closed myself off from the genuine support my parents might have offered. Their perception of my professional trajectory had been shaped as much by my reticence as by my sister's narrative framing. "I know," I said quietly. "I'm working on finding a better balance with that." Mom squeezed my arm briefly, a rare physical demonstration of affection. "Good. That's all we want, to be included in your life, the struggles and the successes." From the dining room came the soft sound of a chair being pushed back as Vanessa apparently gave up the pretense of organizing leftovers. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, container in hand. "Do you want me to pack some dumplings for you to take home, Lily?" she asked, her tone carefully casual. "Sure," I nodded. "Thanks." Mom glanced between us with barely concealed curiosity. Our relatively cordial interactions throughout dinner had clearly registered as unusual after years of thinly veiled competition. "I'll just check on your father and Michael," she said transparently, wiping her hands and leaving us alone in the kitchen. Vanessa began efficiently packing dumplings into the container, her movements precise and economical. "So," she said quietly once our mother was out of earshot, "tomorrow's the official announcement?" "Yes," I confirmed, closing the dishwasher and leaning against the counter. "Company-wide email at 9, press release at 10. She nodded, securing the container lid with a definitive snap. "And you really weren't going to say anything tonight? Let them find out some other way?" I considered her question, recognizing the legitimate concern beneath it. "I wanted one more normal family dinner," I admitted, "before everything changes." "Changes how?" she asked, her voice neutral, but her eyes sharp with genuine curiosity. "You know how," I replied. "Once they know about the position, every conversation will filter through that lens. Every family dinner will include updates and expectations and—" I trailed off, struggling to articulate the complex emotions surrounding this impending shift. "And there won't be the comfort of being underestimated anymore," Vanessa finished unexpectedly. "No more flying under the radar. No more surprising people with your capabilities because they never saw them coming." I stared at her, startled by this insight that demonstrated more self-awareness than I had credited her with possessing. "Yes," I acknowledged. "Something like that." She handed me the container of dumplings, her expression thoughtful. "It's strange to realize you might have cultivated the very perception I thought I was imposing on you," she said. That, in your own way, you were using my, let's call it, narrative framing to create space for yourself without scrutiny. The observation was unnervingly perceptive. I had indeed come to value the freedom that came with being underestimated, the ability to experiment, to take risks, to define success on my own terms without the weight of others' expectations. Maybe, I conceded, but there's a difference between choosing to fly under the radar and being forced to stay there by someone else's limitations. Vanessa absorbed this distinction with a thoughtful nod. Fair enough. She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I'm planning to call Mom and Dad tomorrow after the announcement goes public, to make sure they hear about it directly, not through industry gossip or LinkedIn updates." The gesture surprised me, a small but significant indication that she was acknowledging her role in shaping our family's perception and taking responsibility for helping to correct it. "Thank you," I said simply. "I appreciate that." "Don't get used to it," she replied with a flash of her usual sharpness, but the edge was softened by the hint of a smile. "I'm still going to argue with your strategy assessments and question your project timelines when we end up working together eventually." "Eventually?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. She shrugged with deliberate casualness. "Elysian isn't the only prestigious firm in the industry, and the next time we meet professionally, I intend to be better prepared." There was no malice in the statement, just the straightforward acknowledgement of her competitive nature and ambition, characteristics that had always defined her. Before I could respond, Michael appeared in the doorway. "Are you two actually having a civil conversation?" he asked suspiciously. "Did someone die? Is there a natural disaster I haven't heard about yet?" Vanessa rolled her eyes. "We're capable of normal sibling interaction, Michael." "Evidence suggests otherwise," he countered, leaning against the door frame with studied nonchalance. "This is weird. You're being weird." He narrowed his eyes at me. "And you've been extra mysterious. All evening, what's going on?" I exchanged a glance with Vanessa, a silent communication passing between us. "Nothing that won't be clear soon," I assured him, tucking the container of dumplings into my bag. "But I should probably head out. Early meeting tomorrow." Michael remained unconvinced but didn't press further, instead offering to walk me to my car. Outside, the evening had cooled considerably, a gentle breeze stirring the leaves of the maple tree that had shaded our childhood games. "Seriously, though," he said as we reached my car, "something's different with you and Vanessa. Did you two have some kind of sister summit I wasn't invited to?" I smiled, appreciating his perceptiveness beneath the casual questioning. "Something like that," I acknowledged. "A recalibration." "Cryptic," he observed, "but as long as it means fewer tense family dinners, I'm all for it." He studied me for a moment longer, his expression softening. "You seem good, Lil, centered. Whatever's happening with work, and don't think I haven't noticed you're being deliberately vague about that. It seems to agree with you." His genuine warmth reminded me of why, despite his chronically chaotic life choices, Michael had always been the family member I felt most comfortable confiding in. "It does," I confirmed. "It really does." He hugged me goodbye, then stood in the driveway until I pulled away, waving with the unself-conscious enthusiasm he'd maintained since childhood. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of Vanessa watching from the living room window, her expression unreadable at this distance, but her presence registering as a silent acknowledgement of the shift between us. The drive home felt different, from the anticipatory tension of my arrival, calmer, more settled, as though something had been resolved even without explicit discussion. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own revelations, but tonight had offered something I hadn't fully realized I needed. A bridge between what had been and what would be. A transition marked by small moments of recognition rather than dramatic confrontation. In my apartment that evening, I prepared for the week ahead with methodical care, selecting my outfit for tomorrow's leadership breakfast, reviewing presentation materials for the afternoon department meeting, responding to a few remaining emails from Alexandra about the announcement protocols. Professional tasks that anchored me in the reality of what I had built over the past 6 weeks, regardless of how others might perceive it. My phone chimed with a text from Alexandra. "Everything set for tomorrow. Car will pick you up at 7:30 for breakfast. Wear something camera ready. Marketing wants executive team photos after the announcement." I confirmed receipt and set my phone aside, moving to the window that overlooked the courtyard garden. The same view I'd contemplated after Vanessa's visit days earlier, but the perspective felt subtly altered. Not by any external change, but by the internal shift that comes with reconciling different versions of oneself. The privately competent professional and the publicly perceived family disappointment. The strategic leader and the overlooked middle child. The person I knew myself to be and the person others had decided I was. Tomorrow would collapse those divergent identities into a single public narrative. The thought brought both anticipation and a curious sense of loss. The end of a particular kind of freedom that comes with limited expectations. The beginning of a visibility that would bring its own constraints along with its validation. Another text arrived. Vanessa this time. "Good luck tomorrow. I mean that." 3 simple sentences that contained more genuine support than a decade of unsolicited career advice. I responded with equal simplicity. "Thank you. That means a lot." Morning arrived with the soft persistence of spring sunlight filtering through my bedroom curtains. I moved through my preparation routine with practiced efficiency. Shower, light makeup, hair styled in a sleek chignon that projected polished professionalism without seeming unapproachable. The navy suit I'd selected projected authority while the jade earrings provided continuity with my personal identity, the balance Alexandra had emphasized as crucial for effective leadership. At precisely 7:30, my phone buzzed with a text from the driver, informing me he was waiting downstairs. I gathered my portfolio and purse, took one final glance in the mirror to ensure everything was in place, and left my apartment, stepping not just into a new day, but into a new phase of professional and personal identity. The executive breakfast was being held in a private dining room at the Westlake Hotel, a discreet venue that combined luxury with the privacy Elysian preferred for internal gatherings. Alexandra was already there when I arrived, engaged in quiet conversation with the CFO near the coffee service. She looked up as I entered, offering a brief nod of acknowledgement before continuing her discussion. This, I had learned, was her management style. Present, but not hovering. Attentive, but not effusive. Her confidence in those she'd selected extended to trusting them to navigate new situations without constant guidance or reassurance. The other department heads arrived in quick succession. Some I'd worked closely with over the past 6 weeks. Others I'd only met in passing during larger meetings. All greeted me with collegial respect, no trace of surprise or question about my presence among them. In their eyes, I had already been established as part of this leadership circle through Alexandra's explicit endorsement and my own demonstrated capabilities. At 8:15, Alexandra called for everyone's attention, directing us to the elegantly set breakfast table. "We have a full morning ahead," she began once everyone was seated. "The announcement goes out at 9, followed by the press release at 10. Marketing has scheduled executive photos at 11 and will reconvene for department implementation. Meetings at 1. She surveyed the table with characteristic efficiency. "Any questions about today's logistics?" There were none. Everyone had been thoroughly briefed on the rollout plan for the restructuring announcement. Small talk flowed easily as servers presented trays of pastries and fruit, poured coffee, and offered various breakfast options. I found myself engaged in conversation about industry trends with the director of product development, the discussion flowing naturally from shared professional interests rather than forced networking pleasantries. At 8:50, Alexandra checked her watch and nodded to her assistant, who had been positioned discreetly near the door. 10 minutes until the announcement. she informed the table. "Phones on, everyone. I expect the response to be immediate and substantial." A ripple of anticipation moved through the group as we retrieved devices from pockets and purses. This moment represented the culmination of months of strategic planning for Alexandra and weeks of intensive implementation for the rest of us, the point at which Elysian's bold restructuring would become public knowledge rather than internal strategy. My phone vibrated at precisely 9 o'clock, the company-wide email arriving with methodical timing. The subject line was simple but impactful. Elysian Partners announces strategic restructuring and leadership appointments. I opened it, scanning the carefully crafted message that detailed the company's evolution, Alexandra's vision for client-centered innovation, and the creation of new departments designed to implement this approach. Midway through the email, a section headed Leadership Appointments listed the names and titles of everyone seated at our breakfast table, including Lily Chen, Director of Strategic Development, reporting directly to CEO Alexandra Winters. Within seconds of the announcement email, my phone began vibrating with notifications, LinkedIn connections, congratulatory messages from former colleagues, even a few industry publications requesting comments. The other executives at the table experienced similar digital avalanches, their phones lighting up in synchronized validation of Alexandra's restructuring vision. "And so it begins," Alexandra observed dryly, glancing at her own screen before setting it face down on the table. "Remember, official comments come only from approved talking points. Direct any press inquiries to communications until after the formal media briefing this afternoon." The breakfast continued with a new energy, conversations flowing between immediate reactions to the announcement and strategic discussions about implementation priorities. I participated actively, offering insights about cross-departmental collaboration opportunities, conscious of how naturally I had come to inhabit this role that would have seemed unimaginable just months earlier. At 9:37, a text from Vanessa appeared among the flood of notifications. "Congratulations, Director Chen. Press release just hit the industry newsletters. Mom and Dad are officially shocked and confused. Called them as promised. You might want to check in when you get a chance." I smiled slightly at her message, the formal Director Chen acknowledging my position while the mention of our parents maintained our newfound personal understanding. Before I could respond, another text arrived, this one from Michael. "What the actual hell? Director of Strategic Development? At Elysian? When were you planning to mention this minor career development, Lily?" Mom is simultaneously crying and telling everyone who calls that she always knew you had exceptional potential. Dad is pretending he's not emotional, but keeps rereading the press release. "Call them." Alexandra caught my expression as I read Michael's message. "Family just finding out?" she asked with surprising perception. I nodded, slipping my phone back into my pocket. They knew I had something in progress, but not the specifics. I wanted to wait for the official announcement. She studied me briefly, then offered an unexpectedly personal observation. Professional recognition often reshapes family dynamics in unexpected ways. It's rarely as simple as we anticipate. The insight suggested she'd navigated similar terrain in her own life, though she'd never shared personal details during our professional interactions. "I'm discovering that," I acknowledged. "Take whatever time you need this morning to address personal communications," she added. "The photography session isn't until 11, and your presence isn't required for the media briefing." I thanked her, appreciating the rare glimpse of personal understanding beneath her typically businesslike exterior. As breakfast concluded and the group dispersed to their respective preparations for the day's events, I found a quiet corner of the hotel lobby to make a call. My mother answered on the first ring, as though she'd been sitting with phone in hand, waiting. "Lily." Her voice carried a mixture of excitement and something that sounded almost like uncertainty. "Hi, Mom," I replied, settling into a leather armchair partially screened by a large potted palm. "I'm guessing you saw the announcement." Director of Strategic Development at Elysian Partners, she repeated, the words spoken with careful precision, as though she were reading them directly from the press release. Reporting to the CEO. A pause, then. Why didn't you tell us, Lily? The question contained no reproach, just genuine curiosity mingled with a hint of hurt. I considered how to explain the complex reasons for my silence, the desire to establish myself without family narratives, the need to prove my capabilities in an environment untainted by history, the simple pleasure of building something solid before subjecting it to external evaluation. I wanted to be certain everything was confirmed before sharing the news, I said, offering the simplest version of truth. And there was a confidentiality agreement until the official announcement. 6 weeks, she said softly, and I could hear the subtle rebuke beneath the words, not for my professional choices, but for excluding them from this significant chapter of my life. Your father and I thought you were still looking for positions. We've been worried. Guilt tugged at me, sharpened by the recognition that my silence had caused unnecessary concern. I'm sorry about that, I said sincerely. It wasn't intentional. The transition happened quickly, and then I was immersed in building the department. Vanessa called this morning, Mom continued, her tone shifting slightly. She said she just found out recently herself, that you two had talked about it. The statement contained a question. When had this conversation occurred, and why had Vanessa been included before they were? We ran into each other professionally last week, I explained, careful to respect Vanessa's privacy regarding her interview. It was unexpected. We talked afterward. She sounded different when she called. More. Mom paused, searching for the right word. Measured, I suppose. Said we should be very proud of you. That positions like yours aren't given. They're earned. The description of Vanessa's comments surprised me. Not just supportive, but actively countering the narrative she had helped construct over years of family dinners. It represented a more significant shift than I had anticipated, a deliberate effort to reframe my capabilities in our parents' understanding. That was thoughtful of her, I said carefully. Your father wants to talk to you, Mom said, and I heard rustling as the phone changed hands. Lily? My father's voice carried its usual restraint, but with an undercurrent of emotion I rarely heard from him. Director of Strategic Development. That's substantial. It is, I agreed, smiling at his characteristic understatement. The press release mentions you'll be building a new department, leading a team. He cleared his throat. That's significant responsibility. Yes, we've been assembling the team over the past few weeks, implementing new processes. It's challenging but exciting work. A brief silence followed, filled with all the things my father found difficult to express directly. Finally, he said simply, "We're proud of you. Very proud." The words settled around me with unexpected weight, more affecting for their rarity and restraint. "Thank you, Dad," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "That means a lot. Your mother wants us to take you to dinner to celebrate," he continued, retreating to the safer territory of practical arrangements. "When would work with your schedule? I imagine things are quite busy right now." We settled on dinner the following weekend, giving the initial announcement excitement time to settle and allowing me to focus on the crucial first days of public implementation. As I ended the call, promising to send more details when available, I felt a curious mixture of relief and melancholy. The former at having finally bridged the gap between my professional reality and my family's perception of it. The latter, at recognizing how unnecessary much of that gap had been. My phone immediately lit up with another call. Michael this time, no doubt bursting with questions and commentary. I answered with a smile already forming. "Yes, it's real. No, I'm not. Joking. Yes, I should have told you sooner." 6 weeks, he exclaimed without preamble. 6 entire weeks you've been a corporate powerhouse and said absolutely nothing, while Vanessa sent you job listings for assistant positions. This is both the most hilarious and most infuriating thing you've ever done. It wasn't about creating a dramatic reveal, I explained, though part of me recognized the satisfaction I'd felt at Vanessa's shock during our interview. There was a confidentiality agreement, and then it just seemed simpler to wait for the official announcement. Simpler for whom? He challenged. Certainly not for Mom and Dad, who've been genuinely worried about your financial stability. Not for me, who could have been bragging about my sister, the executive, this whole time. His tone shifted, becoming more serious. And maybe not for you either, Lil. You shouldn't have had to navigate all this alone. His perception, as always, cut through my careful rationalizations. Maybe you're right, I acknowledged. But I needed to establish myself there without external voices or expectations, even well-meaning ones. I get that, he said after a moment. I really do. But next time you're orchestrating a major career triumph, could you maybe give your favorite brother a heads up? I promise not to tell the parents. I laughed, grateful for his ability to lighten moments that threatened to become too weighted with emotion. You're my only brother, Michael. Semantics. He dismissed breezily. Now tell me everything. Start with how much they're paying you, because the press release mentions an aggressive expansion initiative, which has to mean serious money. I glanced at my watch, noting I had about 40 minutes before needing to prepare for the executive photography session. It's competitive, I said diplomatically. But more importantly, it's work that genuinely challenges me. Diplomatic non-answer, he observed. Very executive of you. I'll get it out of you eventually. His voice softened slightly. Seriously. Though, Lil, I'm really proud of you. This is huge. Thanks, Michael, I replied, warmed by his straightforward support. I should go. There's a full day of announcement activities ahead, but I'll call you soon with more details. You'd better, he warned cheerfully. And fair warning, expect an absolute inquisition at the celebration dinner. Mom is all ready, making a list of questions about Lily's important new position. After ending the call, I checked my messages once more. Dozens of congratulations from former colleagues and industry contacts, several from Meridian employees expressing surprise, and in a few cases, interest in potential opportunities at Elysian. I responded to the most important ones with brief acknowledgments, promising more detailed replies when time permitted. One message remained unanswered, Vanessa's text about our parents' reaction. I considered how to respond, wanting to acknowledge her role in managing that initial conversation without overcomplicating our still evolving dynamic. Finally, I wrote, "Thank you for calling them, and for what you said about the position being earned. I appreciate that more than you know." Her reply came almost immediately. "Just stated facts. Enjoy your moment. You've worked for it. We can talk more later." Simple, straightforward, without the qualifiers or subtle undermining that had characterized her communications about my professional life for years. Not effusive or overly emotional, but genuine in its recognition. It felt like the beginning of something new between us, not erasing our history or pretending past patterns hadn't existed, but creating space for a different kind of relationship moving forward. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated corporate choreography, the executive photo session where I stood confidently among colleagues who had held their positions for years, the department meeting where I presented our implementation timeline to the full team, now expanded with newly announced hires, the congratulatory reception Alexandra hosted for the leadership group at day's end, complete with champagne and appropriately restrained celebration. Throughout it all, I maintained the professional composure that had become second nature over the past 6 weeks, but with a new dimension of certainty. The internal confidence I'd always carried was now matched by external validation, not just from Alexandra or the company leadership, but from the broader professional community and, perhaps most significantly, from my own family, As the reception wound down, Alexandra approached where I stood by the window, champagne flute in hand. "Successful first day," she observed, joining me in looking out over the city skyline gradually illuminating as evening descended. "Very," I agreed. "The team is energized. Client responses have been predominantly positive." She nodded, her expression satisfied, but already focused on next steps, future challenges. "The real work begins tomorrow," she noted. "Announcement excitement fades quickly. Implementation is where vision becomes reality, or doesn't." "We're ready," I assured her, knowing the extensive preparation my department had undertaken during our weeks of confidential development. "The frameworks are solid, the team is aligned, and we've anticipated the most likely obstacles." Alexandra's mouth curved in the slight smile that was her version of emphatic approval. "That confidence," she said, "is precisely why I sought you out for this role." She paused, then added with uncharacteristic candor, "I recognized something in your approach 6 years ago, a quality most organizations either fail to notice or actively discourage because it doesn't fit established patterns. You see connections others miss, possibilities beyond conventional boundaries." I absorbed her assessment, appreciating both its professional insight and its personal significance. "Thank you for creating space for that perspective to be valued," I replied simply. She acknowledged this with a small nod, then expertly shifted back to practical matters. "Review meeting at 8 tomorrow morning. We'll need to address any immediate market reactions to the announcement and finalize the client transition schedule." With that, she moved away to speak with the CFO, our brief moment of personal connection complete, but its impact lingering. By the time I left the office that evening, darkness had fully descended. The city transformed into a landscape of light and shadow. The day's intensity had left me simultaneously energized and exhausted, mentally stimulated by the challenges ahead but emotionally drained from navigating the personal dimensions of the announcement. I decided to walk part of the way home, needing physical movement to process the day's events. The spring evening was mild, the sidewalks still busy with late commuters and early dinner crowds. As I walked, I found myself reflecting not on the professional triumph the day represented, but on the personal recalibrations it had set in motion. My phone vibrated with a text from Vanessa. "Mom called again. They're planning a family celebration dinner next Saturday. Fair warning, she's inviting extended family. Aunt Linda is already asking if you can help her son with job connections. Welcome to being successful in the family context." I smiled at the message's dry humor and practical heads-up. Vanessa, using her extensive experience with family dynamics to help me navigate territory she had long occupied alone. "Thanks for the warning. Any advice for managing expectations without disappointing everyone?" I replied. Her response came quickly. "Set boundaries early and firmly. Be specific about what you can and can't do. And bring wine. Lots of wine." This straightforward advice, offered without condescension or competition, felt like the beginning of a new phase in our relationship, one built on mutual respect rather than comparative evaluation. Not a complete transformation or an erasing of past patterns, but an evolution towards something healthier, more balanced. I continued walking, my path taking me past the gleaming office tower where, just 6 weeks earlier, I had first met with Alexandra to discuss the position that would reshape my professional identity. I paused, looking up at the illuminated windows reflecting against the night sky, remembering the mix of excitement and uncertainty I'd felt that day. The uncertainty had since resolved into clear purpose. The excitement evolved into steady commitment. What I hadn't anticipated was how this professional shift would catalyze personal ones, not just in how others perceived me, but in how I understood myself in relation to them. For years, I had defined myself partly in opposition to how Vanessa characterized me, quietly proving my capabilities while allowing her narrative about my limitations to go unchallenged in family contexts. That dance of assertion and acquiescence had become so familiar I'd stopped questioning its necessity or its cost. Now, standing in the shadow of the building that represented my professional achievement, I recognized how that pattern had constrained us both, me in always needing to prove my worth, her in always needing to establish her superiority. The reversal of our positions during the interview had cracked open that dynamic, creating space for something more authentic to emerge. My phone buzzed again, a reminder about tomorrow morning's early meeting and several items requiring preparation. I hailed a cab for the remainder of my journey home, professional responsibilities pulling me back from personal reflection. My apartment that evening, I prepared for the next day with methodical efficiency, reviewing talking points for client calls, finalizing team assignments, and addressing the most pressing emails that had accumulated during the day's events. The work felt grounding after the emotional complexity of the announcement day. Concrete tasks with clear parameters and defined outcomes. Just as I was completing my preparations, a final text arrived from an unexpected source, my father, who rarely initiated digital communication of any kind. Your mother and I looked up Elysian's recent projects tonight. Impressive scope. Looking forward to hearing more about your role when you're ready to share. Proud of you, Lily. The message, so characteristically reserved, yet genuinely supportive, brought unexpected emotion to the surface. My father had always been the quiet counterpoint to my mother's more expressive presence, his approval conveyed through subtle nods and practical assistance rather than effusive praise. This direct statement of pride represented a significant departure from his usual communication style. I responded with equal simplicity, "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. Looking forward to dinner next weekend." Setting my phone aside, I moved to the window that had become my place of reflection during this period of transition. The city spread before me, a tapestry of lights against darkness, each illuminated window representing lives and stories, as complex as my own. Somewhere across town, Vanessa was likely preparing for her own workday tomorrow, perhaps already formulating new career strategies in light of today's industry developments. My parents were probably still discussing the surprising news of my position, recalibrating their understanding of my professional path. Michael was undoubtedly regaling friends with the dramatic reveal of his sister's unexpected corporate ascent. And here I stood, at the intersection of who I had been in their perception and who I had become in reality, the space between no longer as vast as it once had seemed. The announcement had collapsed those separate identities into a single public narrative, one that would continue evolving through my actions and choices rather than through others' assumptions or limitations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: client, reactions to manage, team dynamics to navigate, strategic decisions to implement. The professional path ahead was clearly defined, marked by specific objectives and measurable outcomes. The personal terrain was less predictable, relationships shifting in response to changed circumstances and perspectives. Yet for the first time in years, I felt fully integrated rather than compartmentalized. My professional capabilities acknowledged within my family context, my personal history informing but not constraining my professional identity. The sister, who had been dismissed at family dinners, and the director who commanded respect in corporate boardrooms were no longer separate personas, but aspects of a single, complex whole. As I turned from the window to prepare for sleep, I noticed the jade earrings I'd worn throughout this pivotal day resting on my dresser. My grandmother's legacy, a connection to personal history I'd carried into professional spaces. Small pieces of jade, valuable not just for their material worth, but for the continuity they represented, the blending of past and present, of heritage and innovation. Tomorrow I would wear them again, not as a talisman against uncertainty or as a private reminder of identity, but simply as part of who I was, a professional shaped by personal history, a sister evolving beyond established patterns, a woman claiming space on her own terms while remaining connected to what came before. The journey from that Sunday dinner where Vanessa had dismissed my capabilities to today's public recognition had spanned just months in calendar time, but represented years of internal work and quiet determination. The most meaningful victory wasn't the title or the compensation or even the professional respect. It was the integration of self that came from being fully seen, limitations and capabilities alike, and moving forward from that place of honest recognition. As I drifted toward sleep, my thoughts returned to the moment in the interview room when Vanessa had first recognized me behind the desk. That instant of shocked recalibration that had set everything else in motion. Not revenge or vindication, but simply truth revealing itself in its own time, in its own way. The satisfaction hadn't come from her discomfort, but from the authentic recognition that followed. The beginning of seeing each other as we truly were rather than as we had decided each other to be. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and triumphs, its own moments of tension and connection. The restructured family dynamics would require as much careful navigation as the restructured corporate ones. But tonight, in the quiet of my apartment, with the day's achievements settled around me like a gentle affirmation, I allowed myself to simply be present with what had been accomplished, professionally, personally, and in the delicate space between where all meaningful growth ultimately occurs. The journey hadn't ended with today's announcement. In many ways, it had only begun. But the path forward felt clearer now, illuminated not just by external validation but by internal certainty, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth and having it recognized, not despite your history, but inclusive of all you have been and all you might yet become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.